Hello and welcome to Lunch and Learn Wednesdays presented by Venture Portland. My name is Jacob Falkenberg. I'm the Communications Director at Venture Portland. And today we're going to be talking about board officer roles and responsibilities. So for folks who are new in their role or have taken on a different role, or just learning how to work together cohesively as a board to get things done, there are some things you should know about your role, some things you're legally obligated to do, some things that are best practices, and just ways to make the most of your time because it is limited. So we'll start off by just talking a little bit about how business district leadership is different than leadership roles in other capacities, whether it's a small business or other organizations. I guess the biggest difference that you're dealing with as a business district leader is you're working primarily with volunteers. So these are your peers, and they're donating their time. They're other small business owners, so their time is limited, like I said. And they can leave if they get frustrated, and it could be hard to replace them. So there has to be a certain level of flexibility there and understanding when people are unable to fulfill their obligations or they have limited time. Making sure that they feel like their voice is heard, that they have a role on the board that really kind of caters to their own interests is going to make you more successful in the long term. You also need to keep in mind that there's limited bandwidth. Everybody's running their own business. So this limits the ability to implement complex projects. So you want to make sure that as you're planning your year and coming up with your work plan as an organization, you don't want to take on too much, right? You got to recognize how many volunteers do you have at your disposal? What's your budget like? Are you fortunate enough to have a part-time staff person maybe? And really right size the projects that you want to do throughout the year to fit that, because you don't want to set yourself up for failure. It's easy to get spread too thin or careen from crisis to crisis, and you end up actually not getting anything done as people get burnt out or projects are unsuccessful. You don't want to make promises to your members that you can't keep. Business districts also have diffuse authority, so responsibilities are spread amongst all the board members. It's not just one person's responsibility to get things done. It's really about working together, either as a board or in a committee structure. And people might not assume responsibility, and they may need to be delegated tasks. And as a board officer, one of your primary roles, especially as a president, is to delegate to the other board members, so you don't have to take on everything. People know what they have to do, and they feel supported in their work. Avon says, is there some kind of pre-designed format for volunteer roles? Yes, there is. We have job descriptions that we're going to talk about a little bit later that will clearly outline everyone's role on the board. And that's really helpful for making sure people understand what they need to be doing. So yeah, put a pin in that. We'll get to that in just a bit. Okay. You also want to keep in mind that it's a marathon, not a sprint. Strengthening the economy of a business district is complex work. You're not going to have the budget or the resources of some larger organizations to really be able to tackle difficult issues, crime, houselessness, things like that. They might be beyond the scope of what your district can do. But you want to really focus on things that are going to benefit the district as a whole. So what benefits one business may not help another. Things that you do might be great for your restaurant businesses, but not so much for your service businesses. And your members are going to have different opinions on what a thriving district looks like based on what their business is. So as a leader, you want to make sure to take everybody's feedback into consideration as you're kind of coming up with a plan for what you're planning on doing. But understand that not everything you do is going to benefit everyone. And really doing what's best for the district is what you should be focusing the majority of your time on. You're also going to be dealing with turnover. That's an inevitable part of being on a nonprofit board is turnover happens. People, their business moves, they term out, they lose interest, they get burnt out. Turnover is something you just can't avoid, but you can take steps to have planned turnover. So as a business district officer, you want to have a leadership pipeline in place. So someone that's kind of working with you, maybe shadowing you to take over your role once you have to step down. But turnover can be good. It helps you to get new energy in, new ideas, new perspectives, so you don't end up doing the same old thing over and over again. So you're always going to be seeking and recruiting and training new people. And we'll talk a little bit about who might be the lead on that. That might be something a committee could be tasked with rather than everyone individually. So how are you going to thrive as a leader in your district? Well, you want to lead through influence, not power. So in a group of peers, executive leadership, where you come up with an idea and direct others won't work, it has to be collaborative, right? You want to be taking everyone's ideas and concerns into consideration and then coming up with a plan, building coalitions, facilitating agreements, and inspiring the group to want to participate. So not only working with your own board, but how can you develop relationships with other organizations in your district that might be able to support you, businesses that might be able to financially provide assistance, other businesses that might be able to provide additional volunteer assistance. But you want to really think about how can you inspire people to want to participate. And a lot of that comes from coming up with specific things for people to do based on their existing interests or skill set. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. You also want to develop a long-term district vision. As a member of the executive committee on your district, use your charisma and communication skills to convince the rest of the board that your path is the best path. You want to be persistent and use people skills, keep people from getting sidetracked with pet projects. A lot of the times, people on your board are going to have something very specific that they are passionate about and interested in, and they may go off on tangents. So you want to make sure, as a leader of the board, to reel people in. Having a work plan is really helpful for keeping on track and making sure that each month what needs to get done, so you don't get sidetracked by people's pet projects or tangents, and you don't get into a situation of organizational amnesia where you're doing the same thing over and over again, regardless of whether or not it was beneficial or successful, but because it's something comfortable that you know how to do. So I highly recommend developing a work plan. I'll send out a work plan template with the follow-up email that kind of can help with developing this long-term district vision. As I said, as a business district leader, you've got to delegate, right? You can't do it all yourself. That's just going to lead to burnout. So a big part of being an officer on a board is realizing what needs to get done and finding the right people to get them done. You can't manage it all yourself. But sharing the decision-making and the leadership and responsibility with your board, right? People want to feel like their voice is being heard. They don't want to just be told what to do. They want to have input on what's going to get done. But as a leader, you really want to think about who's the best person for the job and how can we kind of help them understand that this would be a good fit for them. Volunteers are inevitably going to have conflicts and periods of low morale. That's inevitable. You've got so many strong personalities in one room together. Sometimes things don't always go as planned. So really, you want to be able to manage the conflict. If someone is doing something that is disrespectful or something that could make others not want to participate, as a district leader, it's your job to manage that conflict. Figure out how to carve out compromises and keep the key players in the fold. Who's the most valuable people on your board based on their experience or their skills, and how can you keep them happy? Is it finding a role that interests them? Is it taking something off their plate? It's a lot about managing people. So you want to make sure to hone your facilitation, your conflict resolution, and relationship building skills as a leader. You're also the guardian of your district's culture. So whether you realize it or not, every organization has a culture, and that's just basically a set of internal behaviors that dictate how you get things done. And you want to strive for a culture that is healthy, right? That makes people want to be there. And that usually involves having characteristics such as trust, integrity, cooperation, passion, continuous achievement, and camaraderie. Really building people's sense of belonging and feeling like they're a part of something that's doing something positive for their community. You want to be tenacious, so keep at it. Don't get derailed by minor issues. As we said, there will be turnover, there will be failure, but there's no substitute for persistence. Don't get discouraged by failure. Learn from that failure and continue to move forward as an organization. Okay, so this is just some general things to think about as being a leader of an association. Let's talk a little bit about some of the legal responsibilities that you have as a board member. And these are things for all nonprofit boards to keep in mind, that not only yourself, but everybody else on the board should be having in kind of the back of their minds as you're kind of meeting and having these discussions. So all board members are required to participate, right? You can't just join the board and then not show up. So a lot of the times, districts will have rules where if someone doesn't show up for 3 times in a year, they will be assumed that they have stepped off the board. It's not required to have this, but it does help you keep board seats open for people that actually want to be there. Regardless of someone who joined out feeling pressure to join, or they thought it was a good idea but realized they didn't have the time. You want to have people that are participating. So keeping track of people's attendance is something I think it's a good idea. Obviously things are going to come up, and you want to give people the opportunity to have excused attendance or excused absences, but making sure everyone's participating and feels comfortable participating is a big part of being a board officer. Also, as board members, you want to serve the organization, not your businesses or your employer's self-interest. So if there is something specific that you are passionate about, or that your business is passionate about, make sure that it also serves the organization and the district as a whole. You're there for the betterment of the entire district. You're not just there to self-serve. Also, act with duty, care, and prudence to the organization, right? So as you're kind of working together, you're working together for the betterment of the organization. You don't want to do anything that could reflect negatively upon the association. Here's a big one. Know and follow your bylaws, policies, and other governing documents. So your bylaws are kind of your marching orders, right? They kind of dictate what you need to do and how to do it legally on a month-to-month basis, right? So how many people constitute a quorum? How many people do we need to have on the board to actually be a valid board? How long are people's term limits, and anything you could possibly wonder about the nuts and bolts of the organization are going to be fine in your bylaws. You'll also want to have policies that will dictate just how people can act and behave as a part of the organization. So this could be, your anti-harassment policy, your whistleblower policy. We've got all these templates available. If you don't have these policies in place, I highly recommend instituting them and having everybody on the board sign policies, just so it kind of sets the expectation of how people need to behave. In case there is a problem, you can go back and point to these policies in the event that someone needs to be removed from the board, or someone needs to be just help to understand the culture and the expectations of the organization. Also, as a board, you should be reviewing the organization's financial statements on a monthly basis. So this is, something that's part of your monthly board meetings. A lot of the times, best practice is the treasurer prepares these financial statements a week or two ahead of the board meeting, sends them out to the board so they can review them, and then they're prepared to talk about them at the board meeting to ensure that the finances are being handled appropriately. Transparency is really important in volunteer-run organizations. You want to make sure that everyone feels like the funds are being spent in a way that is appropriate based on the work plan and everything that's been kind of prior agreed upon by the organization. And also keep the organization's confidences, right? So the discussions that happen in board meetings or via email should not be shared with the press or the public, making sure that people feel like if they're having a conversation, they're saying things, that it stays within the group. Also, you want to support the majority decisions of your board, even if you disagree. So every time you meet as a board, you're going to be voting on various things. Even if you vote one way and the majority votes a different way, once the board has spoken, you want to still support that decision, even if you disagree. And that's just part of being a team player, right? And that's how things get done. Everybody needs to be bought into decisions in order to make them work. You only want to act as the organization's spokesperson when you're authorized to do so. Spokesperson for the press and things like that. Typically, this is going to just be the president and the executive director, if you have one. And this just keeps it from having mixed messages, right? If you have one point person to be the point of contact, then you're not getting into a situation where one person on the board says something and then another person says something that doesn't quite match up with that. So make sure that everybody knows who the organization spokesperson is, and they know that if they do get approached by the press, to refer them to that spokesperson. Chris says, what do we do as spokesperson if a decision has not been made in time? So I'm assuming that this has to do with something is happening in the district and the press comes to you asking, what is your opinion on a specific issue, but the board hasn't had time to meet and discuss that. It's okay to defer those questions. So you're not legally obligated to answer any questions from the press. It's okay if you don't have an answer that's been, approved by the board, to say, our board hasn't had a chance to discuss that yet. Can I follow up with you once we do meet? And sometimes they'll say, that's great. Yeah, you can follow up in a week or 2 weeks or however long it's going to take. Sometimes, a lot of the times, they're working under a really tight deadline where they need an answer by the next day. But it's better to defer a question if you haven't had a chance to discuss it with the board, rather than go rogue and say something that the board has not had a prior chance to discuss yet. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be the board. Sometimes, it can just be your executive committee. Mm-hmm. But, as president, you do want to have some sort of conversation with other board members before discussing any sort of confidential or controversial things with the press.
I don't intend to derail us or stop you for much of a second. I'm also looking at spokesperson as a decision on how the association proceeds forwards with certain opportunities, like for instance, a grant, because we're in grant cycle. If the board is talking about things but doesn't come to an official decision by the time a deadline for something comes up, and we miss an opportunity because there is no consensus or there's no actual conversations happened, do we have the opportunity to say, I'm acting in the best interest of what I know is our organization and association's goals, aims, and missions, and therefore I'm going to submit something that is with that care and evidence in it, even if my board erupts at me afterwards because nobody talked with each other in enough time for us to come to a consensus to have a drafted thing that's ready to go, this, that, and the other by a certain deadline. I am technically speaking for the association to a grant opportunity without a board approval. That did not happen on this one, but just
Yeah, no, as president, I think you are in a position where you can make that decision based on, okay, we're up against a tight deadline, and I'm going to act in the best interest of the organization by moving this forward rather than not doing it because we haven't had a chance to talk about it. So I would probably reserve that for the president or the vice president if the president's not available. That's probably the best course of action. But if you're not an officer, then I don't think that they would have the authority to do something like that. But as president, I think you would be able to. Okay, so just back to talking about some of the more legal responsibilities as a board member. You want to ensure that the board receives proper advice before voting. So this isn't something you need to do every vote, but in some of the more tricky decisions, you might want to get the opinion of a lawyer or other professional, a consultant, before making any large decisions for the organization. But Chris, as you said, something as simple as applying for a grant, generally that's going to be seen as beneficial for the organization. Anytime you can generate funds, I think the board would have the support even if they haven't had the chance to meet yet. You also want to give prospective board members a clear understanding that they're going to be expected to do work between meetings. So these boards are working boards, right? If you do have staff, they're probably part-time. So the majority of the work does have to be done by the board members. So as you're going out and recruiting new board members, having that job description that I talked about that we're going to kind of go over to kind of set the expectation of the number of hours that they might have to be volunteering each month and the types of things that they're going to be doing. That really helps to get the right people in those seats, so you don't get into a situation where a month or two down the line they end up stepping down because they didn't know what they were getting themselves into. Also, board committees should be doing most of the nuts and bolts work. So you should have several committees aside from your board that can help with planning events, recruiting sponsors, membership recruitment and volunteer recruitment. And they're going to be getting into the nitty-gritty of actually getting those projects done and then giving updates to the board during your regular monthly board meetings. You want to make sure you're not going to stretch yourself too thin, especially with a committee. 3 to 6 members is kind of the sweet spot. If you have 1 or 2 people on a committee, generally that's going to be too much time that needs to be dedicated, and you're going to get people burned out and you're going to be setting them up for failure. So it's best to have fewer committees with more people than a bunch of committees with just a couple of people on them. That way everybody feels supported and they feel like they're not just alone in the things that they're doing. And also capitalize on people's interests. As I said, the most effective way to recruit people for being on your board or for being in an officer role or for serving on a committee is to relate it to what they're interested in, right? Why did they join the board in the first place? How does this role relate to their business or their skill set? You know, a lot of the times when you're approaching people directly, if you can relate that ask to something that they already do, you're going to have a lot more success in getting their buy-in to actually agree to do it. You also want to be asking for reports at each board meeting, so it's obvious who's following through and who's not. So make sure to carve out time every month during your board meeting for committee reports. And then those committees can kind of talk about everything that they had done in the prior month. What are they struggling with? What do they need help with? And then any conversations around maybe changing course, just so you don't have any surprises down the line. Speaking of board meetings should be brief and limited to updates and decisions that require group attention. So, you know, a lot of people are passionate about things. Sometimes they can go off on tangents, but you want to be respectful of people's time. Always have an agenda and stick to that agenda, and make sure the things that you're discussing are the most pressing things based on what you need to get done in the coming month. Find ways to increase staffing. You know, easier said than done, I know, but having even a part-time staff person to support the board is extremely beneficial, even if it's for a specific event that requires a lot of volunteer time and a lot of planning. Think about ways, how can you increase staffing? We just wrapped up our staffing grants. I know Prosper Portland had a staffing option on a grant that they had recently released. And also thinking about how can we make staffing work based on our dues structure? Is there any businesses in the district that we could approach about a sponsorship to help fund a staffer? So start thinking about ways, you know, even if it's just a couple hours a week, to get people, get a paid person in there to kind of help to keep the ship moving forward, even when the volunteers are unavailable. You're inevitably going to have bumps in the road, but just don't let them stop you. So persistence is key, even when things don't go as planned. Okay, so let's take a little bit of a look at these job descriptions, right? So I'm going to send these over to you afterwards, and it's a really helpful tool for making sure just everybody knows what their specific responsibilities are. So I highly recommend having a copy of this for each board officer, and making sure each officer has a copy so they can kind of make sure they know what they need to be doing on a monthly basis. So let's start with the president. And as I said previously, the president responsibility is not to do everything. There is a lot of decision making that happens. You know, the president has this vision for the district, but it's not entirely on them to make it happen, right? A lot of part of being a president is delegation. So in addition to being a regular board member, your board president leads the board in maximizing the effectiveness of the district and its work. So, you know, making sure that people are doing what they need to be doing, making sure that things that are being done are actually beneficial to the businesses in the district. You're leading the board and presiding and facilitating over board meetings. So that means setting the agenda for the board meetings. And once the meeting starts, making sure that the conversation stays on topic, and making sure that you stay within the agreed upon time for the board meeting. So a lot of it is just facilitating those board meetings, presiding over meetings, also of the executive committee, right? So a lot of districts, they have their board meetings each month, but they also have an executive committee meeting with the president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary to discuss some of the more specific things that weren't able to be brought up in the board meeting. So the president also will set the agenda for the executive committee meetings if you have those. The president also ensures that the board and its members are aware of their responsibilities. So the things we just kind of went over, what are they legally obligated to be doing? Make sure that they have copies of the bylaws and that they're following the bylaws and they're following the agreed upon ground rules, if you have ground rules for your meetings. And that they're just kind of conducting their business effectively and efficiently. And people are accountable for their performance, right? So that comes back to making sure people have space to report on what they had done in their committees, just so the president can kind of track the progress of each committee's over month. President can also propose policies and practices. So if there's a specific thing the organization as a whole wants to adopt, the president can propose that. And the president can also sit on various committees and is kind of an ex officio member of those committees. So the president doesn't have to be on any of the committees, but if there's something happening where a committee needs extra support, or someone has to step down and it's just one or two other people left on that committee, the president can kind of step in and serve as kind of a support for that committee. But they do have the right to attend those committee meetings, and they should be copied on committee communications just so they can kind of keep track and make sure everybody's fulfilling their obligations. The president can also propose the creation of a committee and appoint members to those committees. So if there's a committee that doesn't exist that you would like to see for the board, the president can officially propose that during a board meeting. The president also can submit various reports to the board, funders, and other stakeholders. Doesn't happen too often, but if there is something specific around a grant or contract, the president can get involved with that. The president also monitors the performance of the directors and officers. So again, just kind of keeping tabs on people, making sure they're doing what they had been asked to do, ensuring that structures and procedures are in place for effective recruitment and training of board members. So that's the kind of key wording there. Make sure that the structure is in place for recruiting the board members, but it's not the president's job to recruit board members. It's great if the president has somebody in mind that they want to approach, that they already have a good relationship with, about joining the board. But typically, a lot of districts will have a specific committee that's tasked with recruiting members and board members. So the president would be tasked with essentially organizing that committee, but not necessarily doing regular work with that committee. President is also the primary liaison between the board and staff. So if you are fortunate enough to have staff at your organization, the president would be the one charged with your weekly check-in, your monthly check-in, whatever it might be, performance evaluation, things like that. Anything that you would typically do for a staff person, the president's going to be that staff person's kind of primary point of contact. President also ensures that you have positive relationships with the media, funders, donors, and other organizations, and is the primary spokesperson for the organization. As I said, typically the president and the executive director are the two people who will speak to the press and have relationships with the city and other partner organizations and things like that. Also, thing to keep in mind is that leadership pipeline, right? Help the board identify and mentor your successor. So typically your successor is going to be your vice president. So as your term is coming to an end, or you're coming to a point where you have to step down, as president, it's kind of your responsibility to help to find somebody that's going to take your place and give them an opportunity to kind of shadow you for a little while, just so they can kind of see what your role entails. And then performs other duties as the need arises or is defined by the bylaws. So a lot of responsibilities for the president. Most of it is just, decision-making, delegation, being that primary point of contact for all the different components of the organization. but not necessarily the person that has to do everything, which I think a lot of the times the president kind of gets stuck with. So speaking of the president, let's talk about the vice president, because the vice president is essentially the person that takes on the role as president when president is unavailable. So really the vice president should be in a position where they can shadow the president and where they feel comfortable stepping up into that presidential role once the president does have to step down. So your vice president is going to kind of manage those board meetings when the president's unavailable, facilitate the executive committee when the president's unavailable. Something that's kind of best practice, not required for a vice president, is to chair the nominating and board development committee and leading the recruitment of the future board members. So this is something we kind of talked about with the president, as far as the president is going to create the committee for developing the board. And then the vice president kind of chairs that committee and helps to lead the recruitment for the future board members. Prepares to be president of the association in the future. They still have to be elected, but the idea is that they would be in a position where they can easily just take on the role once the president steps down. And then also, this kind of similar to the president, making sure people are fulfilling their duties as board members, that they are complying with bylaws. Really, you're just kind of support for the president to back them up when they can't fulfill their duties. Okay, next is the secretary. And I'm sure most of you know that the secretary is the record keeper of the organization. So the most important thing here for secretary is taking those minutes, right? For each board member or board meeting, making sure those minutes are taken, and then sending a draft of those minutes to the rest of the board prior to the next board meeting, just so they can be reviewed and then approved at that board meeting. The secretary also keeps the records of the organization. So in addition to minutes, the other organizational documents, such as the articles of incorporation, bylaws, resolutions, voting results. A lot of districts have all this information in a Google Drive or a Dropbox, something like that. So the secretary should have access to this drive and be the person who is continuously adding new documents to this drive, organizing the drive, making sure that these documents are available when needed. And also keeping records with third parties. So this could be grant agreements, memoranda of understanding, contracts, things like that. Making sure that, you know, once something is signed, it ends up in that drive, or a lot of times there could be paper copies as well. Also maintaining the membership list. So the secretary is kind of tasked with keeping track of which businesses are members of the association, who's paid their dues and who hasn't. And when an organization's membership lapses, making sure that that organization knows that their membership dues are due. And also keeping track of, you know, who's the primary contact for that member. The secretary also kind of manages the voting process. So at your annual meeting, when you're electing your new board, the secretary will prepare the ballots, tally and validate the votes during the meeting. And then also ensures proper conduct during meetings. You know, the secretary can help to schedule the meetings, providing the meeting times, place, and agenda. So essentially the president can create the agenda, give that to the secretary, who helps to organize the specifics around the meeting, whether it's an in-person or virtual meeting. They're essentially just managing those meeting logistics. And then finally, we have the treasurer. So the treasurer is the keeper of the financial condition of the organization. So they should have a full understanding of what's the organization's budget, what's the expenses happening on a monthly basis, and then reporting on that regularly to the board. So that should be a monthly piece of your agenda as well, is giving the treasurer time to talk about those months, the prior month's financial activities. The treasurer also kind of oversees other financial aspects of the organization, whether it's paying vendors or authorizing expenditure of funds. A lot of the times, if there's a large expense that will require two signers, which is typically will be the president and the treasurer. But treasurer is monitoring receipts and monies owed, making sure that there's no inappropriate spending, things like that. You're going to work with the board and staff to prepare the budget. So every year, the treasurer should kind of lead that process in determining, okay, what amount of money are we expecting to bring in the coming year, and how do we want to spend that? So really carving out time once a year with the board to kind of nail down what's the budget for the coming year going to look like. And then you also want to ensure proper financial controls are in place, just to minimize the risk of any errors or malfeasance. So that means establishing, who are the co-signers on checks over a certain amount, like I said, who has access to bank accounts, and just regular reviewing bank activity regularly, just to make sure that nothing strange is going on, and then reconciling those bank statements. And sometimes organizations will work with an accountant or a bookkeeper if you have a larger budget. So the treasurer can work in tandem with that individual if it requires a little bit more financial expertise. Treasurer also collects dues and documents dues from potential members, and presides over meetings and activities of the finance committee if applicable. So you may or may not have a finance committee, but if you do, the treasurer is going to chair that committee and help to determine what the activities of that committee are, whether it be deciding the budget, things like that. Okay, so those are your 4 officers. And I've been talking for a really long time. So I'm going to stop and just give everybody a chance to ask questions about anything that we discussed, or anything that's going on in their district that they want to chat about. All good, huh? Okay, well,
I'll say something if
yeah,
no one
Avon.
says anything. Yeah. So on the job descriptions that we're talking about, I have those and all that for volunteers, but what I find maybe challenging or maybe just time consuming is when I have a specific task that I need for a volunteer. I really like to have it delineated so that that volunteer who has all the energy and excitement and everything that they want, you can take that and really put it into the scale of what we really need, as opposed to just being like, all right, fix the website, or get some recruits or whatever, because then they do whatever it is on their educational level and their personality and all that, and it may not be exactly appropriate for the task at hand. And then we can, if I have that kind of format, then I can judge that, or give them feedback on performance and task, as opposed to personality, or that kind of thing, if that makes sense. So that's, I guess, what I'm kind of trying to hope to get for like a specific task type of outline.
I see. Okay, so it's more of like a template that you can use if you're asking someone to do something or work on a specific project,
Right,
where
right,
it'll
exactly.
have, their
Yeah.
name, what they're responsible for doing, what the timeline is, maybe.
Right,
Just so you
right,
can kind
right.
of you can have a copy, they can have a copy, and you can kind of use that to keep track.
Right, exactly. And then, that way they can kind of delineate their skills and their time frame into, what we need, and we both have an expectation, and I have a kind of a checklist where when they come to me, I can be like, all right, well, here's what we were thinking, and were you able to perform that or not?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good idea. I'll have to look and see if we have anything like that. I know a lot of districts use their work plan as something similar to that, where it's kind of your blueprint for the entire year, what needs to get done on a month-to-month basis, and who's
Right.
responsible for that. And then that way, at each board meeting, you can kind of take out that work plan and say, okay, here's everything that we needed to get done last month. Did it get done? And where are we with some of this stuff? So
Right.
at
Yeah.
the very least,
Because
I
I,
can,
I have some of them started, but it's very time consuming to do it for every task and every duty that I need to kind of delegate.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it works better when you have it all together in one big document that everybody can
Right,
have,
right.
and everybody's on the same page at that
Yeah,
point.
exactly.
So
Okay, great.
I can I'll send that over to you just so
Okay.
you can kind of see what that looks like. I think
Thank
that's a
you.
really useful tool to kind of make sure everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, Jacob.
Yeah, no problem. Anything else before we wrap it up? I know it was a lot of information. So, certainly take time to kind of digest. And as things come up, you can feel free to reach out to me individually. But hopefully, this is a little bit more helpful in clarifying some of those board roles that hopefully you're being supported with other people on your board as well.
Yeah, just as somebody who is starting his second term in a year, my first year, 4 of our board members who were relatively active all walked away for life reasons. So I was left with the association basically by myself and Jeff Lynott, who is the best person to be stranded in an association with, by the way, who's been left to work for the city. So I now have a new board, and we have no onboarding or anything like that. So even though all these things are like just so logical, like we all run businesses, we all kind of know how these structures should work. Just having a simple refresh of what things can and potentially should and really do need to look like does set a really good path for being like, don't freak out. It's gonna be fine.
Yeah, no,
Our
yeah.
systems, even if it takes a while to put them in place, have some grace. You can do this. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, Chris, I think even just focusing on board recruitment before anything else, and not worrying about planning any big events or doing anything that may have been done in previous years with a larger board. You can't put your cart before the horse, right? So just focus on the basics first, and then once you get some good people in place, then you can come up with, okay, what's our work plan going to be? What are our goals for the coming year? But yeah, you can't do it alone. So it's as kind of the president, focusing on recruitment, I think is your best bet at this point to keep from going too crazy. Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here. And I'll be sending a follow-up email tomorrow with some more information. So feel free to continue the conversation if questions come up, but we'll say goodbye for now and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Jacob.
Thanks. Take care.
Mhm.